Good morning, St. Louis. How are you all? Is everybody ready for our morning plenary? I can't hear you. Are you awake? Do you need coffee? Okay, there's more coffee somewhere outside. I heard one person. There was like one person over here who wants more coffee. And when you go out, can you bring me some? No, I have some down here. So good morning, welcome to the second day of the New Partners for Smart Growth Conference. I'm Steve Hansen, and I'm very pleased to be here this morning, not only serving on the board of the LGC, but also as the newly elected vice chair. Our former chair, Jake McKenzie, who many of you know not only by his natty attire and his Hawaiian shirts, but also by his Scottish brogue, he regrets that he couldn't be here because I know many of you really want that little panache that he brings. So hopefully you accept that we're trying to do our best without him while he tends to business at home. But this morning we want to talk about a new era. And as I was just telling Kate Meese, I don't know what I know anymore because things have changed so much. And many of us in cities are trying to catch up with both technology, with a changing world, with a changing set of priorities and a federal government that has sort of caused whiplash amongst many of us, not knowing whether the funding we have today will be there tomorrow. And just on that front, we heard this week that all Federal Transportation Administration funding may be cut for transit districts. And for us, that would mean a 30% reduction in funds. And that would mean several million riders a year wouldn't be able to be served. That's the environment in which we try to adapt and try to change. And I think somebody has the slide clicker, but I don't have it. Oh, thank you. That's our next presenter, who I'll introduce in a second. So I'm from Sacramento, and many people know Sacramento has had these eras. Sacramento came about because of railroads, which is sort of Back to the Future technology. And Sacramento was the terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. We had rivers, and we're also the state government capital for the state of California. But yeah, thank you for whoever's clapping. You've obviously seen the good work we're doing. But we've also, like many government capitals, we haven't always kept up with what's going on in the world. And I think our city, just in the last few years, has tried to really innovate. Let me see if I can make this move. Nope. I pointed somewhere. Oh, there we go. So we really want to be a smart city. And who doesn't want to be smart? The person who wanted more coffee certainly has acknowledged that we all want to be a little smarter thanks to caffeine. But who doesn't want to be a smart city? Everybody wants to be a smart city, but what does that mean? We're going to hear from two great speakers today, but I think that means a lot of things. We're now inundated with information, whether it's our Apple Watches or the pedometer on our phone. This thing tells me when I need to breathe, which is good because sometimes I stop breathing, and when I need to stand up and move. But it's also tracking my heart rate. That's a really interesting thing, but when we take it forward to everyday life, many of you have seen the TED Talk of the mayor in Rio, who was tracking his garbage trucks from a headquarters somewhere, and it looked like, the National Security Council situation room. Now you can do that from your phone through GPS, and there's so many things that we have that are at our fingertips. But I want to just tell you about a few things going on and try to get your juices flowing for our next speaker. But first, I couldn't help myself on this one. And one of you will recognize this song. I'm just going to read it because I can't sing. And it really does play into how we handle these issues. I've got gadgets and gizmos aplenty. I've got who's its and what's its galore. You want thingamabobs? Well, I got 20. But who cares? No big deal. I want more. This is the life of a city council member and many city planners and city officials these days. It was also the life of, thank you. There she is, the Little Mermaid. She was excited by the world beyond, and she wanted to go up where the people are. And that's, to some of us Luddites, how it feels when it comes to technology. But, you know, this all started with somebody who wanted to know in Cambridge whether the soda machine downstairs had a soda in it in the 80s. So they programmed the machine to connect to the internet so they didn't walk downstairs unless there was actually something in it. This is human innovation at its best, always driven by a need. But now, as I was saying, we've got all these things that give us data, and the inanimate is really becoming animate. It's like the whole world around us is suddenly alive, and we don't always know how to handle it. And I think, too, this ubiquitous kind of computing has made us vulnerable in ways. Many of you followed this internet attack that happened in October, and it may have been the Russians. This was a separate issue than the election. This was when the entire United States was suffering an internet outage at almost the same time, and it appears to have been driven by our Nest cameras, our Internet of Things devices, because many people bought them and left the default password as password. And so those things were turned into a little army of attackers that attacked the internet in one fell swoop and brought it down for a period of time over the course of a couple days. And it was a valiant fight to turn it around. And that is one example of how we're now suddenly faced with all these new challenges. And we have to figure out, as we embrace this technology, how to not only keep ourselves safe and smart, but also how to keep our privacy intact. And there's also a great scene for those of you who watch Mr. Robot. If you ever break your leg like I did, and you're at home, and you've got a lot of internet time or Netflix time, go watch Mr. Robot. It's kind of a fun show. It'll scare you. This one episode, this woman who works at a financial institution has a smart house. And the hackers hack the smart house, and they make it go nuts. The blinds, the appliances, the lights on and off, and the TV running loud, the stereo, and then they move into the house after they scare her out of it. I think that's probably not what's going to happen to us, but what I do see happening is all of these devices that are sensing where we are, what we're doing, how we move, will help us build better cities. In Sacramento, we've started with pedestrian counters in some of our downtown parks, so we can actually see the volume of traffic when it comes to justifying investment in those parks, because, you know, a lot of the downtown facilities, people don't necessarily live nearby, and a lot of what we do is we invest in neighborhoods. So how do we justify the use of those facilities if we don't necessarily know who's using them? And these pedestrian counters have also helped lease office space in our Capitol Mall area, because we know now what the foot traffic looks like. And that will help with retailers and many others. We're using it in traffic management. We just opened a new arena downtown, and everybody thought there was going to be this Carmageddon. Literally, if you've ever worried about a new downtown development, this was the epitome of hysteria, because everybody thought our street grid, which handles 100,000 cars a day, couldn't handle the 10,000 extra that would come through this arena. But through planning, and yes, planning works, we implemented a smart parking system so people could use an app in advance to pick their parking spot, and they knew exactly where to go. You can also pay for your parking at a meter. You can see where meters are open. That helped, but also we were able to use intelligent traffic systems to make sure that our streetlights could be controlled remotely, so we could make them flow better where there's more congestion and help manage it so that there weren't these bottlenecks. Those are just a couple examples. We're also doing LED streetlights, and I actually have more slides. I'm just afraid this thing won't work. There's the Internet of Things. There's the watch. There's the old meter. Anybody missed that? Oh, no. He might be helping me back there. I think that's the secret. There's the new meter. everybody loves. You can use your phone, you can use a credit card. It's got a sensor to say when there's a card there, so we can manage inventory. Parking, exciting. But in the excitement, we've also figured out a way to make our garbage delivery service more effective. We can put an RFID chip now on the bottom of a garbage can, and that will tell the truck to pick it up. And also, if the truck misses that RFID chip on the route, they'll go back and they'll grab it because they know that they missed one. So they can really track. I don't know if that works. There's the chip. They can go track what they're doing. And if you're a city official, you know that the biggest complaints you get are about garbage and parking. If we've suddenly taken away the top two categories of public complaints, can you imagine the level of satisfaction in government that's gone up? You picked up my garbage, thank you, and I didn't get a parking ticket because I could put more money on the meter from my phone. That's like curing cancer in the world of civics. And I swear to God, you would not believe how excited people are about these simple things. But we're using it now for air quality. London, for instance, has 150 monitors around the city, and they're using that to predict pollution 2 or 3 days in advance on a neighborhood level. So if there's an inversion layer or something, they can warn you in advance within a 10% accuracy, and that helps public health. And there's so many other things we're doing now that the Internet of Things has enabled, whether that's smart bike share, where instead of having the docking stations, your bike now is connected to the internet. You can open the app and find out where it is. You don't have to return it to a station. You can, through convenience, lock it up somewhere else, and someone can find it. It may charge you a little bit more if you choose not to return it to the station, but the person who finds it and brings it back actually gets a credit. So in the weird world of capitalism, this is enabling us to have more choice, more opportunity, but more efficiently use our resources. I think the final thing I would say is through all of these data points, we are gathering a tremendous amount of information. That metadata, that combination of all those little pieces, now has a powerful opportunity to be analyzed through things like open government, open data portals. And it will hopefully give us trends and tools to better serve our growing cities. As we use these resources more effectively, we will need to get smarter about the capacity of them, the ability to leverage them for more, because we have tremendously underused assets in a lot of our cities, whether that's infrastructure or just places in time. And I think this will give us a chance to be better. So with that, I'd just like to introduce our next speaker, and he's going to be a lot more interesting than me. I was here to warm you up and get you focused. His name is Stephen Hardy. He's the co-founder of MySidewalk. Stephen, why don't you come up? It's a technology startup that uses spatial data to improve community decision-making, and they're in 180 cities across the country. Before that, he worked for a senator, the Conservation Fund, and had an urban planning practice. He's actually a certified urban planner and has a degree from Harvard School of Design, so he knows what he's doing. Thanks, Stephen.
I can assure you the Harvard part of that has nothing to do with me knowing what I'm doing. Thank you, Stephen. It's always nice to have Stephen tag teams on panels. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm loving this conference so far, and hopefully you continue to do that after this presentation. So, as a planner, and I think no matter who you are, if you're at this conference, you're a planner at heart. It's your responsibility, it's our responsibility to think in terms of generations, right? We're the ones with the long view. We're the ones that can see the forest. And that can be difficult when the pace of change mirrors what Stephen was talking about. So if you just kind of look back, and we're looking for historic precedents about moments of great shift in our country, especially as it relates to land use, you can look at technological innovations that really drove that, whether it was the agricultural age, land being the fundamental the ingredient of innovation, the industrial age, iron. It's hard to argue that cars didn't dramatically shape the land use of the last 2 generations. And now we would argue that data is the next shift in land use. And so what does that mean? Well, the big challenge, of course, is, many of you probably know Jacob Riis. In each of these great shifts, there have been winners and there have been losers. And we're on this moment, this precipice of knowing we're about to undergo another shift, and knowing that there will likely be winners and losers. How are we a little bit more proactive about that? This is a slide I've actually been using for about 15 years now. This is the crossroads of Kansas City. For those of you that know Kansas City, it is probably the part of town that's had the most reinvestment over the last 15 years. It's the vibrant arts center of the community. It's a startup center of the community. All of the red that you see on that is parking lot. You can also easily see the interstates and the public right-of-way, the street network that intersects that. And if you do the math on this, it's about 50% of the land use is parking. Another 25 to 30% of the land use is streets and roads and interstates. So the question is, what happens if all those cars go away, right? Which they will. We know that. There's no chance that they don't, right? So if we don't have our own cars, you don't have your own automobile, there's some other form of transportation network, and our employees don't need more square foot for their automobile than they do for their office space. What do we do with all of that land, right? And this is a challenge for everybody, but particularly for every city that's not in the top 10, right? The mega regions are going to be okay. What about everybody else? So this is my son. I know that is a hard slide transition between like innovation, my son. His name's Andrew, he's 5. And when we think about the urgency behind making our roads safer, I like to think of Andrew. And I have a bet with my brother, Andrew's uncle, that Andrew will never drive. And I went double or nothing on that this year. So again, just from a generational perspective, 2 years ago, everybody would have thought that was crazy. Now, like, how many of you would take that bet, right? So we live in a moment where data is the raw material of innovation. What does that mean? Well, it's a completely different kind of resource. Data is a resource. It looks totally different than everything before. It's accessible in massive quantities. You can't really put your fingers on it, right? But it's powering this Internet of Things, because it's not really the machines that are so interesting. It's the data exhaust that they kick off and what we can do with that. How many of you like SimCity? Any SimCity players? For those of you that play SimCity, you know one of the new natural disasters is rise of the machine, right? And so we're challenged not only with the shift in land use, but the shift that we know that's going to be happening in employment over the next generation. So the question is, again, thinking back about winners and losers, who's in control, right? Who's in control of the machines? Who's in control of the data? Who are we building this stuff for? The private sector's figured this out, right? Every successful, most successful business of the last 10 years is driven on data. It's not a better product. It's that they're using data to find some kind of efficiency, some kind of scale. Out of curiosity, how many of you deleted Uber in the last week? Definitely some, just curious, okay. So Uber's figured it out, Amazon's figured it out, Netflix has figured it out. All of these companies are built on data, not product. So what's the common thread? As you heard, we're working with about 180 cities right now, and there's a word that we hear more frequently than any other word in the English language, and that's we're hamstrung. We're hamstrung by silos of data. We're hamstrung by shrinking budgets. We're hamstrung by our ability to make sense of the ever-growing mountain of data that's out there. I got to hear Madeleine Albright speak a couple of days ago, and she had a quote that I thought was really appropriate. Citizens talk to their government with 21st century technology. Their government listens with 20th century technology and responds with 19th century policies. That's what we're up against, right? And just like there are people that will win and lose, there are cities that will win and lose. There are more cities in decline than are growing. We will see cities literally disappear in the next generation. So in the information age, most cities will protect their data, many will open their data, and a few will actually harness that data. The good news is it's not that hard, right? It felt really hard a couple of years ago, but it's not that hard. And again, you can kind of look to the private sector for some examples. This is one of my favorites, Netflix. You're probably all Netflix subscribers. So Netflix was, just a couple of years ago, trying to decide, they knew they wanted to get into the content business. They were trying to decide what their first original piece of content should be. So they looked at their subscribers, they looked at the behavior, and they said, wow, people like David Fincher. They really like that director. You know what else? They really like that House of Cards show from Britain. That's interesting. And Kevin Spacey. Our audience loves Kevin Spacey. And you know what? Those three things are highly correlated. Same people like all three of those things. So for our first piece of original content, our first big bet, let's get David Fincher to direct House of Cards with Kevin Spacey in it, right? That was it. 3 data ingredients, really simple insight, launched what is now, basically changed the entire market about content creation. And we can do this, right? This is doable. 3 ingredients. I don't think anything's more fundamentally changed the way that I think about using data in cities than that little Venn diagram. Think about this in 3s. Where should we put a farmer's market? Where do we need health clinics? Where should we hold our next workshop? Small things. You can look at data to prove those. Where and when do commuters bike to work? Where should we put our after-school programs? Where do we build housing to retain millennials? And bigger examples too. How do we prepare for disaster? How do we fight blight? How do we eliminate pedestrian deaths? All of these, you can get insight on all of these just by looking at data sets that are available and easily overlaid, because they're all geospatial. That's the good news, right? All of this is place-based data. So just a few, so those are kind of hypotheticals. We're building this library of solutions, these little 3 data set solutions that can be applied everywhere, and we're seeing communities across the country start to think like this too. So in South Florida, they're trying to decide where to focus their brownfield redevelopment. They're looking at air quality, they're looking at where their brownfields are, and the social vulnerability index. Those 3 things help them make that decision. Many of you know the Smart Growth America folks. They're here. They're using that same kind of concept to decide, they're working in many different places. How do we get a quick snapshot of the economic situation in a place? Well, let's look at these 3 things. In Clay County, Florida, they're deciding which businesses to recruit, looking at commute times, employment by industry, and the types of people and the degrees that they have. And when you do that, when you layer that stuff up, you can see, you get a pretty clear sense of where you should target what kind of industry. The Hamilton County Land Bank is wanting to know where to target the reinvestment dollars. They look at tax delinquent parcels, homeowner vacancy rate, and the average parcel value. Right there. We had the chance to work with the White House back in the fall on something called the Opportunity Project. The link, opportunity.census.gov, I highly recommend. It wasn't just us. It was there are now about 20 different technology companies and about 15 different federal agencies that are participating in this ongoing effort to build free tools for everybody to use to provide some kind of insight in their community. I highly recommend that you check it out. So I'm glad you're laughing. This is one of those test your audience kind of slides. because the young people that work in my office are like, what the hell is that? My favorite planning, this is my favorite planning example, better than anything I ever learned in a textbook, Three Amigos. For those of you that seen it, you know there's a scene where the famous, infamous El Guapo is coming to raise the town, and they have to come up with something to save the town. And they're brainstorming, and they say, how are we unique? How are we unique? And they, it comes out that they can sew. They can sew, right? And for those of you that have seen the movie, you know they use sewing to save the community, right? And the point of that is, you can also use data to find out how you're unique, because you are unique. There are lots of examples of ways that you're like other people, and you can use those too, but every community is unique in some way that it's a little bit unexpected, and you can absolutely use that to your advantage. And the best part is, the ways that you can determine that you're unique are growing every day. My favorite data set right now that we just are looking at is citizen satisfaction data. And it's kind of interesting compared to itself, and it's kind of interesting when you look at it in your city, but it's fascinating when you get a whole bunch of cities, 150 cities, citizen satisfaction data, and you throw it in against 500 other million data points, and you start saying, okay, what does this tell us, right? So this is Kansas City. This is a map of how safe do you feel, and it's a map of crime density, and then you can see there's a little on-the-fly correlation, and we know how safe people feel and crime density are not correlated. That's an interesting thing to know. But we also know some places where crime is low, people feel unsafe. Other places, crime is high, people feel safe. Why is that? What's going on, right? You can start peeling that back. Some of my favorite little correlations that are coming out of that data, so crime doesn't correlate with feeling safe. Actually, only two things that we've seen really correlate highly with how safe you feel. The first is employment. Makes some sense. Not income, employment. And then the other high correlate is how you feel about the quality of parks and recreation in your neighborhoods. Interesting. Nonviolent crime, huge impact on the perception of effectiveness of city government. Massive impact. Relatedly, burglary in particular, detrimental to how people feel about raising a family in a community. Then I kind of threw this one in because I think I get a kick out of it. There's a question, one of the questions is, what do you think about the city's image? And you know who loves the highest correlation with a positive city image? People with bachelor's degrees in visual and performing arts. But this is new data, right? New data that's coming from citizens, coming from the people that we're trying to work for. I was on a panel yesterday with John Thomas, and he was using this example. So this is a community that lives right next to a BNSF transfer station, has been complaining about the odors and the pollution for years. Well, went out, found a partner, got an air quality monitoring station, started putting it on front porches, did it for a year, right? And then had the data that said, this is not safe. We've been saying this for a long time. You didn't believe us, now we got the data. Now think about something like this in conjunction with, I know Louisville was running a pilot program with the asthma inhalers that take environmental conditions when children use their asthma inhalers. So start thinking about data like this in conjunction with that data set, and all of a sudden the community has a story that says, not only is this not safe, you're giving my children asthma. You're giving my child an asthma attack, right? How do we react to that? It's a very powerful story and it needs to be addressed, right? But it has huge implications for policymakers. The last piece of advice I'd say is the mountain of data that is growing every single day. I mentioned to you, we deal with 500 million data points. It'll be 1 billion by the end of the year, and that's like nothing. Like we're just kind of nibbling at it, right? The one thing that we've seen over and over again, and especially when working with federal agencies, is there is a massive gulf between the federal data collection efforts and the local government capacity to do anything with that data, right? And there's not even really any context about why this data matters or even why it's being collected. And so I'd say just like the one thing to think about and probably the place that federal agencies can be most helpful is in bridging that gap between the data, why it matters, and why and how it should be structured in an appropriate way. So my advice to cities is make sure that when you're thinking about data that you're doing it in a way that's accessible, that it's integrated, that it's shareable, that it's understandable, that it's impactful. But keep in mind that nobody knows the city like you do. This is not just, it's not just the numbers. You look at the numbers, there is always a reason for part of what you're seeing, and then there's something that'll surprise you. And it takes both your own kind of knowing the place in your bones to really find an innovation in your data. And I think the fundamental charge, the fundamental thing that we're up against is we have this opportunity. We know we're going to go through the shift. We know it's coming. We know who our audience is. We know what our responsibilities are. We have a chance to not think about smart cities simply as infrastructure and tech. Right? We have a chance to think about the people that we serve, and that this should be a human-centered approach to innovation in the next century. So with that, I appreciate your time, and I'll be taking questions in a minute. That one worked.
All right, thanks, Steve. Next up, we have Tom Schenk. Tom, why don't you come up? Tom is the Chief Data Officer for the City of Chicago. He is an author, and he has a very interesting background if you get him later during questions. So right after these, we'll facilitate maybe 15 minutes of questions. He's been leading Chicago's Open Data Portal and a bunch of other projects there. Tom, why don't you come up and tell us what you've been working on? That was not a great intro, I apologize. But we all love Chicago. You want a clicker? You want the one that works? There's the one that works.
Is this the one that works?
Yep, that's the one that works.
I think actually this one for me is the one that works.
Oh, that's the one for you? Go for it.
Which one? All right, I'm going to keep hitting this until I get to something. So thanks, great. Now which one actually worked though? All right, this is going to be an event. So thanks for having me here, and I'm really happy to be here, especially talking to a group, new partners, because I want to talk about that, partners, and what that means. That's important for our cities, given the limited resources that we have, given the growth of cities that we have. How do we tackle today's problems? How do we do that with the newest bits of technology that we have, with the newest methods that we have? There's been a growth in tools available to us. So how do we tackle that? That takes a great amount of expertise. We talk about data, data's there, we're going to use data. But what does that mean? I have a lengthy experience with data, especially in the public policy realms. I used to head education policy, I used to do cancer research, I've worked at think tanks. So I've had this career in data, especially around public policy. But that takes skill, it takes expertise, it takes time. You're not going to get those people within city governments right away. But first and right off, we got to talk about what are we trying to do. And in Chicago, in our tech plan, we've explicitly stated that we believe that the power of technology is driven by the people who use and benefit from it. So it's not technology to technology ends or data to data ends, but thinking about how people can use and benefit from it. And I am completely, if we can advance to the next one. So we're going to do some basic things, right? So when we talk about data, what do we mean by data, and what does data look like for a city? So we're going to do a bit of a test. It's the morning. It's the second day of a conference, so I know some people probably went out last night. So we're going to do a little bit of a test. Can anybody spot the pothole? All right, this is city data. I'm going to go on to the next. All right. Can anybody spot the pothole? There might be more than one. All right. So now we're on the same page. So when we think about data, one way that we work with data is making it publicly available. And this is a good first step for any city, to have an open data portal, to make it available for others. Now, usually when you think about open data, you think about in a sense of transparency, making something available. We have a number of data sets on our data portal, such as 311 calls for pothole filling requests, which you see here on the data portal, which is data.cityofchicago.org. And this is completely available and it's updated daily. But we have a lot more data on the data portal as well, such as red light cameras, speed cameras, violations, problem landlords, public chauffeurs, people who are allowed to drive taxi cabs, bike sharing trips, every single crime in the city of Chicago from 2001 to present. That's 6 million rows of data. Bike sharing trips, as I mentioned before, 50 million rows of data. Data on every single taxi trip in the city of Chicago, 105 million rows of data. But of all of that, the most popular data set on our data portal is 33,000 rows. Something an Excel document could easily handle, something you could easily browse even on your smartphone. It's the name and list of every single employee in the city of Chicago and their salaries. So the emphasis on big data, but it goes back to our original thing. It's to the ends of the people who benefit from it. And people benefit, seem to derive a lot of benefit and pleasure of looking at who gets paid the most. And it's not the mayor. And who gets paid the least? It's the deputy mayor. He gets paid $1 a year. So people want to take a look at this information. So we always have to keep in mind, how is it being used? And it's not always just about transparency. For the salaries, it is. It's really good to make payments available, which we do, so you can see who we pay and how much we pay. But it's those other bits of information that's also valuable for researchers, for students, for economic developers that might be outside of the city government. It's for everybody. So open data provides a means to create an ecosystem around data which includes multiple stakeholders and initiatives that extend beyond transparency. The way I like to call it, the data portal becomes a town square. Town squares are built by governments. Town squares, well, in the old days, would be where people would show up to and have conversations, meet other people with shared interests. And you can have that with an open data portal, because you can come together and say, did you see all that taxi trip data that was released? Think about what we can do with it. Think about how we can maybe map that out in a very interesting way. See if we can figure out flows, the ebbs and flows of the city as people are going to and from different places. How 7 o'clock at night, after 7 o'clock at night, is the peak hour for the use of taxi cabs until about 4 a.m. During the weekends. So it allows people to come together, converse, and go their own way. Maybe work directly with something that we've provided, or maybe they just find an interest and they peel off and do something that's interesting on their own right. So you have communities like this one. This is Shy Hack Night. This is a 1-year birthday that they have, where at this point you had about 24 people fitting into that small room, coming together and celebrating. They meet every single week talking about data that's available on the Open Data Portal. And it's one of the key partnerships that we have. National League of Cities has pointed this out, on our placement and our use of the open data is all about partnerships and how we come together and partner with not only within city departments, making data available not only to the public, but also city employees, but to the community, to researchers, working with those researchers, working with businesses, and working with different city agencies. And this is that civic tech community today. That's that same group that I mentioned at their 1-year anniversary. This is about 4 years in. Now you have between 80 and 150 people that show up every single week thinking about how they can use data to improve their community. This is what volunteerism looks like in the 21st century. When de Tocqueville wrote about early democracy in America, he talked about associations of people coming together, replacing that aristocracy that used to exist in the old country. This is what volunteerism looks like. This is what the Rotary Club looks like today. This is what the Lions Club looks like today. These are technologists, people who have a very particular skill and they can contribute to the community. And they contribute in fantastic ways, such as building websites such as Sweeparound Us, sweeparound.us. It uses data that was on the data portal. Now, something about city employment, government work, this is a general government rule. A minimum criteria you have to work in government is you have to not be able to design websites. You have to be terrible at it, right? There's a test you take. It's a very odd Rorschach test. Choose the worst design. And if you choose it, you're hired. So sweeparound.us, we made the stream of data available where people can, where we sweep streets throughout the course of the day. People come along and build websites on top of that, make this usable, where you can get text message alerts, email alerts, to see, to get notified if your car, if you need to move your car for street sweeping. And if you get your car towed, there's wasmycartowed.com, which is also based on the data portal, see where we've moved your car to. These are built by independent developers, people who don't work for the city. These are people who are taking their spare cycles, such as chicagoflushots.org, where you can get flu shots throughout the city. So this is a fantastic way for us to be able to come together. And you have other people learning from the open data portal as well, such as this individual who took traffic streaming data and he just wanted to learn some very basics of computer engineering and be able to make this little node that either blinks green or red based on traffic estimates that are being streamed over our open data portal. This was a simple learning exercise for this individual, very smart person. But that opens up to this concept of Internet of Things and how we can advance that. And we've worked with a lot of academic partners in areas such as Internet of Things, sensors and devices that we deploy throughout the city. And in one key partnership that we have, in one key project, is the Array of Things, where we're working with the University of Chicago and partnering with the University of Chicago to installing 500 nodes, and every node consisting of 24 to 30 sensors throughout the city of Chicago that have begun to hang up. So we partner with the University of Chicago, we partner with a number of private businesses, and it's supported by a $3.5 million NSF grant, National Science Foundation grant, to hang up these sensors across the city of Chicago that's going to measure things such as sound and vibration, low-resolution infrared cameras so we can tell whether or not we might need to shovel the sidewalks. For those who are here from Hawaii, I saw you on the attendance list, we have this thing called snow, and it's very inconvenient. And you slip on it. And there's invisible ice, black ice. It's not the color, invisible ice. So we can now use these low-resolution infrared cameras not to count people in particular in this case, or look at people, but just to see whether or not we need to send a shoveler out there to clear off sidewalk. Climate environmental data on a block-by-block basis to understand the ebbs and flows of pollution and temperature and climate throughout the city. And these sensors, this whole entire project is completely open source. The design of the nodes themselves are open source. You can go and you can download the schematics. You can actually see the software that's running on these nodes, these devices that are going to be deployed throughout the city. And the data is also going to be open. This is not just for scientists. It's not just for the city. It's building on top of that principle that we had before about taking data and making it available to others. So imagine you're an 8th grade teacher, and now you can use real-life examples of humidity of a sensor down the street to understand humidity in your area, or along the park, or along the lake. It's a fantastic project that, again, builds on those principles that we have around partnership. So let's go back to understanding city data, and we have the potholes, right? Now, what do we do if we want to understand where potholes are across the entire city? Earlier, I showed you a list of data. We saw the images, which you can go and you can point and see, but we also saw a list of data that you saw on the open data portal. But what does it look like when we want to understand events and things that are happening across the city? We've developed an application that you can access. We have an internal version of this application that we use that has even more interesting data. But you can go to this website, opengrid.io, to understand where things are happening. It's using that same open data that we've been publishing on the open data portal. And you're going to see an example of this, where we're taking a look at a lot of different data here, and we can see and understand what's happening there. You can draw on the map, look at particular areas, or look across in a particular zip code, or just look across the entire city, and do very basic filtering to understand what's happening to provide you information. If you take out your phone, you can use your phone's location or even your computer's location to understand actually what's physically happening around you based on your actual location, based on your device. And you can do this sort of heat mapping activity in various different ways that you can now access open data and data in general in a much more user-friendly way. We use data to also drive decisions, and this is important, whether it's prediction, evaluation, optimization, to use data to change decisions that has been made by the city of Chicago. Now, as an example, we have a lot of these throughout the city, but they're not in teacups, and they're a bit more frightening when they jump out at you after, when you're trying to throw your garbage away. This is a map, a heat map of rodent complaints across the city. So we know where the rodent complaints have been. So we can use data to predict where they will be. And in a project that we did in partnership with Carnegie Mellon University, we created a spatial temporal model to predict where rodents are going to be. We started off with looking 350 different factors throughout the city of Chicago to drive these predictions. And we settled on about 32 different predictors, 31 predictors that can predict where rodents are going to be. So today, there's a manager that now has access to a report that updates every single day to show you where the likely outbreaks of rodents are going to be, so we can get ahead of the problem, dispatch to locations based on data that we have, not just based on historical data, but based on data that we think were going to occur in the future. This is food inspections. This is a food inspector inspecting, making sure that a restaurant is maintaining cleanliness. Look at the manual process. We're dipping thermometers into things. So how do we know? We have 16,000 restaurants. How do we know where to send our 32 different inspectors to do that very manual process? This is a challenging problem. The city of Chicago is 235 square miles. So how do we pick out those restaurants across a broad geographical area to say, we need to go here now? So we developed a predictive algorithm, predictive model that focuses on factors, that found factors that are good predictors. Sorry, I went one ahead, I believe. No, that was right. Where we found different factors, and in fact, leveraging open data to get this done. We used data that was only available in the open data portal, even though we didn't have to, because we're interested in about how useful the open data that my team was publishing, if we could actually use that for predictive analytics. And we found these significant predictors: previous critical violations, the 3-day average high temperature before we did an inspection, the FDA-defined risk level, location of the restaurant, nearby garbage and sanitation complaints, the type of the restaurant, nearby burglaries, whether or not the establishment has a tobacco or alcohol license, the time since we've last inspected you, and the time that the business has in fact been open. And we found, using an experiment. I used to do cancer studies at Northwestern University. So we designed an experiment that's akin to cancer studies that you would see, a double-blind A/B test that we ran throughout the city of Chicago to understand whether or not our predictions did better. Now, in short, when we looked at the first half, the rate of finding critical violations in the first half, we're finding about 55% of the critical violations in the first half of our work, which is about what you would expect. But if using a data-driven model, we're able to drive that up to 69% of the critical violations were found earlier. Now, what does this actually mean to an individual? The city of Chicago passed an ordinance requiring that full-time employees have sick time available. If you get food poisoning, you're going to take sick time. If you get food poisoning, you're going to have to go to urgent care clinic or maybe even the hospital. That costs money. If you have health insurance, that's fine. If you don't have health insurance, then it becomes a costly venture. If you have to take care of somebody, whether it's a parent or a child or whoever it might be, that's going to take time away. So these sort of predictive analytics can be used as wraparound policies, wraparound actions to support other policies in the city. Yes, employees need sick time, but what can we do to actually help people avoid getting sick in the first place, to not have to rely upon that? So we were able to find critical violations 7 days earlier over a 2-month period. 8 weeks, we're able to shave a week off in terms of finding critical violations. So we're getting to the problems earlier, avoiding people getting sick. I'm going to skip over that slide. And you can find all the information about this on this website here, chicago.github.io/food-inspections-evaluation. So I'm going to wrap up there. Because what I want to point back to is how partnerships were key for this. You saw working with the University of Chicago, working with various different universities throughout this process matters. About how we can partner with others to be able to deliver not just open data and making data publicly available, but how do we leverage that to work with the community? How do we leverage that to strive better, to be able to explain data in a way that's easier, through a map, such as Open Grid? And then how can we actually use that data to drive operations differently? This is part of what we can drive for, but we always need more partnerships. We need more help in that to be able to achieve this mission of data-driven government. I've been over my time, so I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you.
All right, time for questions. We've got a couple LGC staff in the audience, including Michelle and Jenny. Anybody have questions? It's hard to see, so you'll have to, there's one right here. Yes, sir.
Oh, no, I get to hold it.
Regarding, I think I'll run away with it. Regarding the parking meters, where we have them installed, they're not meters, they're like a muni box, and very often the credit cards are not properly read. First of all, what was the cost of those machines, and what has been your complaint or no complaint rate on their usage?
Was that towards me or towards, yeah,
Towards
Steve?
Steve, yeah.
Tom?
Tuesday, okay.
Would,
The parking meters. You had the slide of the parking meters?
oh, that was me.
That was you, okay.
Sorry, it was so long ago.
It was.
We went on a whole modernization campaign. Partially, we wanted them to be ADA accessible, so that was one of the values we were trying to implement because a lot of the older meters, but also our garages, we wanted to be able to modernize them, and now we have license plate readers, so if you pay in advance, the gate just opens when you pull up. But it was a fairly expensive capital cost that we amortized over the parking fund's life because we were able to use it. So I think it's about, for our 7 or 8 garages and then the thousands of meters, I think we're in about a $10 million capital cost.
On the street, you had to have a meter for each spot as opposed to where we have the box meter that.
I won't say that we did it all at once. We figured out higher traffic areas to do tests and pilots and to educate. And then as we work through some of the system problems, because we're using a company called Park Mobile to do our integration. That's the phone app and works with the meters. I think we've been trying to figure out where some sensors aren't good and stuff like that, but it actually pays for itself over the life because you get to use your asset more. And that was part of the thinking, is that when it's easier to use, they'll use it more, but also we've gone away from the like 1 hour and 2 hour time zones to 1+. So rather than getting a ticket, which part of that revenue goes to the state, we will now let you pay a premium to stay an extra hour over and above that limit, so that the merchants don't have customers coming in and complaining that they got a ticket and never want to come back because they don't want to pay that $52 again. Rather, they can pay $3 versus the $1.75 and get that extra hour and save the money and know that they're secure.
If you have readers, would it be possible, instead of having a meter at each parking spot on a street, to have a central meter where you, with your iPhone,
We used to have those with the stickers, the green
Yeah.
boxes, but nobody liked those.
Well, I'm trying to say, if you
Yeah.
could adapt that to the reader, and then the meter person would have a reader to see if that car's plate has more time on it. Because we've removed a whole million meters, we'd have to reinstall them.
And we reinstalled them because putting the sticker in your car and all that stuff didn't really work. But I think that we found that having the parking sensor, since the infrastructure is already there with the post, to put the meters back in was actually a worthwhile endeavor. But I'm happy to talk to you more. We do, instead of having meter maids, we have little Priuses that drive around reading license plates to see if they're past their time in areas that aren't metered too. So there's a lot of things. All right. I have a question over here.
Yeah, thank you for that great presentation. I'm one of those people from Hawaii, so thank you for the information about snow.
Snow.
But we have very small governments. We haven't really done this open data so much yet, and I'm thinking of the pothole example and how great that would be, but then I'm thinking that we wouldn't really be able to get out and respond to that very quickly, just given staff that we have and resources. So I guess my question is, how do you start? How do you avoid getting too much information that you really can't do anything with? Like, is it good to start with a problem that you want to solve and then get data for that, or just gather information and figure what you're going to do with it? Like, for a small government that doesn't have a lot of resources, how do you start?
Absolutely. I think the strategy is still the same. There's pragmatic things you can take a look at. Early on, it just simply might be about transparency. What are salaries? What are payments? Another opportunity is to take a look at FOIA requests. If you get any FOIA requests or frequent data requests, focus on those as just as a way to make it more efficient of distributing information that's frequently requested to begin with, saving your staff's time. That's one of our favorite things, is to look at frequent FOIA requests and publishing that information, and knowing that department, those couple of individuals, don't have to do this every single quarter or every single year like we used to. And then start thinking about areas such as strategies or targets. If there's anything that the mayor or city council is particularly keen on, such as potholes or homelessness, where you're planning to allocate resources, wrap up open data alongside major policy announcements or major things that you're targeting. And at that point, try to leverage that. Because again, as soon as you start having data out there and available, everybody together can come together and say, hey, let's look at this data, let's look at these problems, and what can we do together to be able to do that? You don't have to sign MOUs, you don't have to go through that contractual process. And I think those are useful steps you can take to make sure that open data is working for you in the government as much as working for people that live within your city.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is oftentimes the fear of getting started is worse, is the worst burden to bear. And so just starting is the right thing to do. And the you know, open everything that you don't want to figure out. And then on the other side, pick a couple of problems, and I think that's right around policy moves. Just pick a couple of things and focus both internal but also just external attention to it, and I think you'll see good return.
Yeah, and just on that note, as policymaker, a lot of times the staff will say, oh, we have to do it all at once, or the public will want every problem solved with one fell swoop. But I think the lowest barrier entry into a new space can be the most successful. And so not trying to overcomplicate things by being perfect and willing to learn in the process is a really important lesson that I wanted to underscore. I saw Jenny had somebody.
Oh, over here.
Oh,
Over here.
Michelle.
Oh, no, I get to hold it. Okay.
So how do you keep your agencies from just punting on open data requests and discouraging them by like charging for them, which is what I hear a lot of counties are doing these days, is charging the requester for the request?
So at times, and we still have a FOIA process that goes through, even and sometimes in interesting ways where we might have data available on the data portal, but people want actual physical copies of a report that has been issued, such as food inspections. There's an actual report that gets issued, and sometimes they want that. That's where the leadership in the organization matters quite a bit, where there's a defined person, in this case myself, who's charged with the responsibility of expanding the amount of data that's on the open data portal that's useful. So I work with those agencies, work with those groups to get data onto their data portal, and sometimes convincing them that this is for their benefit, other times pointing out how we might be able to pair up some of their policy work with open data to make it useful.
And some are charging for discovery as well, like the actual gathering of the data.
Yeah,
Well,
and sometimes, and a lot of times that is happening more with when paper documents or reports are being pulled up, because there's some material cost that's being behind it. Other cities are doing that as well, but just not a lot of people. It seems that the price elasticity is very sensitive for government data, and people don't like to charge for it, and that's obviously the wrong direction to go in.
So, sorry.
Well, Steve's grabbing his thingamabob. I just want to say in Sacramento, when we did open data, we did it very consciously because our Public Records Act request did take staff time. And what we found is by putting the most requested data sets up, it saves us a lot of time and money. And open data hasn't costed us, it's saved. And so in the culture of organizations, we look at these things as new expenditures. But I think if we're doing it right, it should be cheaper and faster, and by putting things up like salaries or other frequently requested things, our budget documents, all that stuff, we've reduced a lot of that impact, and so it saved money.
I think it's such an important question. And I have a friend over here who came to my panel yesterday and was saying, you know, this stuff costs us money. Yeah. You FOIA us, because we do, and that costs staff time and resources. And And there's part of that that's right. But there's also the short view and the long view of this stuff. And I think trying to reframe it around what you can get and where to start is a really important way to think about it. And it goes back to the slide that I had about protecting your data, opening your data, or harnessing your data. And where are you on that scale? And I just grabbed this, and I won't tell you what city this is. Because this is in response to a FOIA request. And this is a city that wants to protect their data, right? They have it digitally, but they only want to give it to us in an analog way. This is building permits, by the way, right? So how can this city succeed in a generation of data as a currency if this is the way that you want to respond to?
Another way to think about that too, so for instance, building permit, which you can get from our data portal.
And ours.
Is there's other people in that city's government that I'm going to guess at some point says, I really wish I had building permit data or for some sort of project, wherever it might be. Again, it might be a planner, it might be somebody working in a water department, a number of different reasons why you'd want to have that. One of the biggest consumers of open data is other government employees. I have access to every single city database, and yet sometimes I go to the data portal because sometimes it's just easier. Databases themselves are complicated. Reporting platforms are very complicated. What you often get on data portals is synthesized data that's exactly what somebody would ask for, and that's just the easiest route. So sometimes think about how that benefits your other government employees so they can start using and harnessing data to get work done.
Both internally and comparatively. I mean, that's the other big benefit here is that if you don't share it, you don't know how you stack up against everybody else. And you can't find the level of insight that you can if you do.
Maybe the final thought before we give it over to Jenny is we like to control things. It's one of the things government prides itself on. And by unlocking the data, we're giving up some control. But I think the point that Tom made about what citizens can do once they have access to that data is, can it really help the city provide better services, help government be better? And so rather than this fear of somebody shaming and blaming us because we think we did something wrong or maybe could have been better but just don't want the moral approbation of somebody criticizing us, when you give that up and you stop worrying about that, there's so much good that comes from it. Jenny?
Hi, I'm Michelle from St. Louis. That leads into my question. You had mentioned with potholes that the original data was driven by 311 calls. Lots of cities, including ours in St. Louis, have a complaint-driven system. How did the data that you collected inform or improve service delivery in more challenged neighborhoods that for many reasons, a history of not being served to their expectations or just cynicism in government, may not be calling in those complaints?
So I want to actually go to the rodent inspection for this, because when we set out to do that rodent prediction project, we said, okay, and I miffed over this in the presentation, but it's worthwhile. We said, okay, we're going to predict where we think rodent outbreaks are going to be within a 1-week time period. That was literally the research mission that we had. And we did a very sophisticated study to see if the rodent predictions worked. Again, kind of a double-blind study. And the first week, we get a call from the manager who sends out these folks to take care of the rodents. Goes, we just went to a location that we never almost ever go to because we never get 311 calls. But there was a clear problem. We laid down 30 baits, 30 different pieces of bait, which means that there was 30 nests along an alley. An alley in the city of Chicago is between 500 and 600 feet long. In that 500, 600 feet, 25 different baits. Now, that's a huge problem. It's quite clear that people would notice that there's a problem, right? That this wasn't new. And then our thought process goes, we're actually not predicting necessarily. We're probably also indicating where people are not complaining to us, but we're finding through data in these alternative means that, hey, there's probably a problem here, and dispatching people to that. So we like that because we might be providing services to areas that are not directly calling us about things like rats, because it may not be the biggest part of their day, might not be their biggest problem. There might be language barriers. There's a whole host of reasons why they're not calling us, but yet we're still detecting problems there. And analytics can be helpful in that, of trying to get rid of that reporting bias or trying to smooth over that reporting bias to go to areas that are not necessarily directly complaining to your city government.
And just on that note, we, in something more serious than the rats, with shotgun gunshots, we implemented ShotSpotter in those areas that weren't calling because we knew that there was gun violence. And so by deploying the system, it listens, one of the 5 senses in the Internet of Things, and can triangulate most likely where those shots were. And that way those communities get serviced. Whereas before they weren't calling, so we didn't know exactly what was going on. And that's another example of how we're trying to help underserved neighborhoods. We have time, I think, for one more question. Yes?
Thank you for being here. I'm from St. Louis. While we're doing a great job of rebuilding our city, the #1 place to start a business in the country, we're not doing a very good job at data. We don't have a chief technology officer, chief information officer, as far as I know, or a chief data officer. If we were going to educate the individuals running for mayor and our citizens, where would you suggest a good primer or a site be that we could try and elegantly begin to educate people about this issue?
Tom probably won't plug himself, but the Civic Analytics Network and that website, what's the larger umbrella?
Data Smart Solutions out of Harvard.
Data Smart Solutions is a fantastic resource. I'd point you towards that. The smart city stuff. What else would you throw in there?
Can you repeat those?
Bloomberg Better Cities.
Repeat those sites slowly, please.
So the Civic Analytics Network is a network I co-founded and chair of. It's based out of Harvard. It's 24 cities and their chief data officers as a network. We come together to collaborate. There's a lot of articles on the Civic Analytics Network website that shows what other cities are doing of various different sizes. Kansas City's part of the network, Cincinnati is, and also larger cities such as Chicago, New York. Data Smart Solutions. It's an umbrella organization over the Civic Analytics Network. Again, a lot of articles highlighting what different cities have done of various different sizes. Some are really data focused, some are about community engagement, whatever that might be. I would look at Code for America. Code for America as an organization has partnered a lot with different governments. Living Cities has done a number of interesting projects with governments as well. I'm not sure if there's anything.
The only thing I might underscore
What Works Cities. That's a particular Bloomberg initiative for cities under a million population, which is most of the cities in the United States.
I think the Code for America one's a great one because it can be from the grassroots. But also in our city, we had a chief technology officer, information officer that wasn't very good when I first arrived. And our city manager and mayor, we worked to get a new person, and she was internal. She's been phenomenal. And she's turned around that department and been a leader. Sometimes just putting the right person in place and empowering them can change your whole city's approach to this stuff.
That's fantastic data, and I'm hopeful that I'll ask Michelle if we can get those posted to your slides so that we have it here, but everybody across the country has it here as they look at these slides. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to Steve and Tom. Thank you, guys.